Welcome to our deep dive into the life, music, and controversies surrounding XXXTentacion.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
going to unpack this biography that, we were given and really try to understand, the story of this young artist
Yeah.
whose career was, as brilliant as it was short.
Right.
He left this undeniable mark on music
Yeah.
and really ignited passionate fandom and intense debate, kind of in equal measure.
For sure. For sure.
What is it about XXXTentacion
Mm.
that makes him so captivating even now?
I think XXXTentacion is so captivating because he embodies the complexities of talent and controversy.
Yeah.
His
Huh.
story is not just about, chart-topping hits, but it's about the difficult realities of a really turbulent personal life
Right.
and the questions that those realities raise about separating art from the artist.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think,
Yeah.
let's jump right into his musical journey. I mean, XXXTentacion, born Jocelyn Foy in 1998,
Mm.
you know, didn't have an easy childhood.
Right.
But, there was this spark of creativity that was really ignited by his aunt, who encouraged him to explore music.
That's right.
And explore. He did.
He did.
I mean, what's striking about his music is that it refused to be confined to a single genre.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He blended elements of emo trap lo-fi,
Ah,
even heavy metal,
wow.
to create this really unique sound that just defied categorization.
Yeah,
And one of the hallmarks of his style was this intentional lo-fi aesthetic,
right.
where he utilized what some might even consider bad mixing techniques
Right.
to achieve a raw, more authentic feel.
Yeah, it's like he was
Yeah.
rejecting the polished production
That's
that was so common in mainstream music,
Right.
especially at that time.
Yeah.
He wanted his music to feel raw,
Yeah.
unfiltered,
Yeah.
almost like a direct transmission of his emotions.
Absolutely.
You could really hear this in early tracks like Vice City,
Yeah.
which, actually only recently got a proper release on streaming services.
Pretty.
It's a perfect example of his signature distorted bass,
Mm-hmm.
raw energy,
Yes.
almost punk rock aggression
Yes.
in his vocal delivery.
Vice City is like a time capsule
Yeah.
from the early days of SoundCloud rap.
Yeah.
But then he explodes onto the scene
Right.
with Look at Me,
Yeah.
which launched him into the spotlight,
Yeah.
with its explosive energy and heavy 808s.
Yeah. And with that song,
Yeah.
you also see his genre-bending approach
Totally.
in full effect.
Yeah.
It's not just trap.
Uh-huh.
There's a punk rock spirit,
Yeah.
DIY aesthetic
Absolutely.
that really set him apart from what was happening in mainstream hip-hop at the time.
Yeah. And then there's the vocal delivery.
Well, yeah.
This raw, almost primal screaming
Yeah.
that you hear. And look at me, alongside those heavy 808 beats.
It's so powerful.
It's super powerful.
It's so raw.
And that rawness is what drew many listeners to his music initially,
Right.
but it's also a precursor to this deeper emotional exploration that he would delve into later on.
Yeah.
He wasn't just angry.
Yeah.
There was pain, vulnerability,
Right.
and a sense of searching that resonated with a generation
Yeah.
struggling with mental health issues.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings us to his debut album, 17,
Oh, yeah.
which marked a shift towards a much darker,
Yeah,
more introspective sound.
for sure.
You think of tracks like Jocelyn Flores,
Mm-hmm.
everybody dies in their nightmares.
Yeah.
There's a haunting quality to them,
Yeah.
a rawness that's almost unsettling,
Right.
especially knowing what we do about his personal struggles.
17 is like a sonic journal
Yep.
of his battle with depression and suicidal thoughts.
Right.
He lays it all bare,
Yeah.
creating this space for listeners to confront their own emotional turmoil. And the production choices mirror that rawness.
Yeah.
It's stripped back minimalist even,
Right.
which allows the intensity of his vocals to take center stage.
Yeah.
It's not about catchy hooks. It's about raw, unfiltered emotional expression.
Yeah. And speaking of emotional expression, his next album
Oh, yeah.
takes listeners on this roller coaster ride through different genres and moods.
Totally.
He explores everything from Latin trap influences to acoustic ballads and even touches on metal.
That's right.
It's like
Yeah.
he's pushing the boundaries of what hip-hop can be,
Yeah.
all while maintaining that signature rawness and authenticity.
And we see him exploring his melodic side more
Yeah.
in tracks like Sad and Moonlight,
Yeah.
songs with a depth of emotion that resonated with a wide audience,
Right.
helping them connect with his vulnerability.
Yeah.
And then there's Changes, featuring P&B rock.
Oh, wow.
Such a beautifully introspective ballad about personal growth and transformation.
Wow.
It almost feels like a glimpse into the person he was striving to become amidst all the turmoil.
Right. But even on the darkness lingers.
It does.
Tracks like Floor 555 are heavy aggressive.
Yeah,
And remind us that, he was still grappling with these intense internal struggles.
for sure.
It's almost as if he was trying to reconcile these contrasting sides of himself.
Yeah.
The light and the darkness, the desire for growth, and the pull of his demons.
That duality, that internal conflict is what makes his music so captivating and ultimately so tragic.
Right.
It's like a mirror reflecting the complexities of the human experience.
Yeah.
The struggle between our best and worst selves.
And unfortunately, that struggle was cut tragically short
Yes.
when he was murdered
Right.
at just 20 years old,
So young.
leaving behind a legacy that is both brilliant and deeply complicated.
Yeah.
His story really forces us to confront this difficult question of how we reconcile the artistry
Right.
with the absence of the artist,
Yeah.
the beauty of the music with the ugliness of the accusations.
It's a question that doesn't have easy answers,
It doesn't.
but it's a question worth exploring.
It is. And explore. We
Yeah.
will as we dive into the darker side of XXXTentacion's story. The controversies and legal battles that cast a long shadow over his career.
Let's do it.
It's impossible to discuss XXXTentacion without addressing the serious controversies that surrounded him.
Yeah.
His legal troubles, began at a young age.
That's right. He faced juvenile charges for gun possession, robbery, and assault,
Wow.
suggesting this pattern of behavior that unfortunately escalated as he got older.
Right. And then there are the deeply disturbing allegations from his ex-girlfriend, Geneva Ayala.
Yeah.
These accusations really paint this dark picture of abuse,
Right.
with Ayala alleging, physical violence so severe that she actually needed surgery.
Right.
And she even started a GoFundMe page to try to cover the cost.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And then you have this leaked audio
Right.
where he seemingly confesses to both domestic violence and a stabbing incident.
Yeah, this audio adds another layer of complexity to the story. Because he later claims in that same recording that he didn't touch her and forgave her.
Wow.
But some journalists, like Jonathan Rice, have pointed out that this clarification seems illogical when you consider the full context of the recording.
I see.
There's also an extended version of that recording that reveals his expressions of remorse and self-disgust for his actions,
Right.
which, further complicates our understanding of the situation.
Yeah, it really does.
And then on top of that, in a recorded conversation from October 26, 2016, Onfroy bragged to a woman that he had bashed Ayala's face on the internet.
It's a lot to process. And then there's that Snapchat video from 2013
Yeah.
that surfaced showing him hitting a girl.
Yeah.
Onfroy claimed it was a joke
Right.
and that he was actually afraid of being extorted.
Yeah.
But it's hard to ignore how this incident adds to this disturbing narrative surrounding his behavior.
Right.
He initially intended to sue for defamation, but according to the source material, he actually dropped the lawsuit when the girl confirmed his version of the events. This raises the question, can we as listeners truly separate the music from the man?
Right.
Can we find enjoyment in his art while acknowledging the very real harm he may have inflicted?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we reconcile this emotional connection that many felt to his music with these disturbing accusations?
It's tough.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a question the media outlets grappled with, too.
Of course.
Rolling Stone called him a zeitgeist-grabbing phenomenon,
Right.
highlighting his undeniable cultural impact.
Yeah. The Guardian, on the other hand, emphasized the cruel violence that was seemingly intertwined with his life.
And the Washington Post even went so far as to note this contradiction between his encouragement to find hope in his music and his bragging about brutalizing others.
It's a paradox.
Yeah, it's a paradox that's hard to ignore. And even in death,
Right.
the reactions to his passing were incredibly diverse.
Yeah, for sure.
There were fans mourning his loss,
Right.
apologists downplaying his actions,
Yeah.
and even those who celebrated his demise.
Uh-huh.
And the controversy didn't end there.
Right.
Remember when Spotify initially removed his music from their playlists?
I do. Yeah.
It sparked this huge debate about whether streaming platforms should support artists accused of such serious offenses.
Yes.
And ultimately, his music was reinstated.
Yeah.
After pressure from artists like Anthony Tiffith, CEO of Top Dog Entertainment, who threatened to pull his label's music from Spotify
Wow.
if XXXTentacion wasn't reinstated.
That's a big statement.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of the moral and ethical dilemmas that his career brought to the forefront.
For sure.
Do we boycott an artist's work because of their actions?
Yeah.
Does listening to their music in some way condone their behavior?
Right. Are we supporting?
Yeah, and what about the influence he had on other artists?
Yeah.
It's undeniable that his music resonated with many young musicians,
Yeah.
especially those navigating similar themes of mental health struggles and alienation.
Artists like Billie Eilish and Juice WRLD openly credited him as an influence. And Billie Eilish has even spoken about how his music helped her through dark periods in her life, and even claimed that he helped her through suicidal thoughts.
It's really powerful to hear her talk about that.
Yeah,
And it highlights this complicated nature of his legacy.
for sure.
Even in death, his presence continued to be felt.
Right.
His impact, undeniable, but always entangled with those troubling aspects of his life.
His final years are particularly intriguing.
Yeah.
He started pursuing education and expressing support for causes like gun control and LGBTQ plus rights,
Yeah.
suggesting a possible desire for personal growth and change.
Right, but at the same time, he was delving deeper into religion and spirituality.
It seems like it. Yeah.
Fascinated by things like the occult reincarnation
Yeah.
and the concept of indigo children.
Wow.
A journalist even noted his tendency to discuss these topics at length,
Oh, really?
as if searching for answers or meaning.
Yeah.
It paints this picture of someone grappling with internal conflict, striving for something more, but perhaps still lost in the process.
Yeah, and then tragically, at just 20 years old, his life is cut short in a premeditated robbery.
It's so sad.
I know.
Leaving behind this complex web of unanswered questions and a legacy shrouded in controversy.
His murder sent shockwaves through the music world.
Of course.
The perpetrators were eventually apprehended and convicted of first-degree murder.
Wow.
And one of them even accepted a plea deal,
Okay.
pleading guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for his testimony,
I see.
shedding light on the events that led to this tragic ending.
Despite the darkness that surrounded him, his funeral saw this outpouring of grief from fans,
Yeah.
demonstrating the deep connection that many felt to his music and the persona he projected despite his flaws.
Right. It brings us back to that central question we've been grappling with.
Yeah,
Can we or should we separate the art from the artist?
right.
Is it possible to appreciate the beauty and emotional depth of his music while acknowledging the pain he inflicted on others?
It's a question each listener has to answer for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's a question that has no easy answers.
Right.
But by understanding the full scope of his story, both the light and the darkness,
Yeah.
perhaps we can engage with his music in a more informed and nuanced way.
Maybe that's the key. To recognize that life, like art, is rarely black and white.
Yeah.
It's messy, it's complicated, and it's often full of contradictions.
And sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that force us to confront those contradictions, to delve into the gray areas,
Yeah.
and to grapple with questions that don't have easy answers.
For sure.
It's amazing to think about the impact that XXXTentacion had on the music scene, especially for artists who came after him.
Yeah.
It's like he paved this new path, showing this whole generation of musicians that it was okay to blend genres, to be vulnerable,
Right.
to express their pain through music.
Absolutely. His influence is undeniable, particularly in the rise of emo rap.
Yeah.
Artists like Juice WRLD and Trippie Redd, who were really close to XXXTentacion and obviously deeply affected by his passing.
Right.
They really carried forward that blend of raw emotion,
Right.
genre-bending, experimentation, and vulnerability in their music.
Even Billie Eilish, who's become this global superstar,
Right.
has talked about how his music helped her through some really tough times.
It was powerful.
It speaks to the power of his work to connect with, those dealing with mental health challenges,
Yeah.
to make them feel seen and understood.
There's this sense of raw honesty,
Right.
of unfiltered emotion in his music
Yeah.
that really resonated with a generation struggling with depression, anxiety, and feelings of isolation.
Yeah.
He gave voice to their pain, providing solace and a sense of community for those who felt like they were alone in their struggles.
And that's what makes this conversation so challenging, right?
Yeah.
Because while his music clearly had this positive impact on so many, we can't ignore the very real accusations of violence and abuse that are part of his story.
Absolutely. It's a constant tension when discussing his legacy.
Right.
How do we reconcile the beauty and the impact of his music with the undeniable harm he inflicted on others?
It's a question that continues to spark debate even now.
It does.
Some people believe we should just separate the art from the artist completely,
Yeah.
while others argue that, it's impossible to ignore the context in which the music was created.
Right.
What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's even possible to appreciate the art while condemning the actions of the artist?
I mean, it's a deeply personal question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Right.
It's something each listener has to grapple with individually.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to acknowledge the complexity of the situation, to hold space for both the positive and the negative aspects of his legacy.
I agree. Ignoring the difficult parts doesn't make him go away.
Sure.
And silencing the voices of those who are harmed by his actions really does a disservice to their experiences.
Absolutely. It's about finding a way to engage with his music and his story
Yeah.
in a thoughtful and nuanced way. We can appreciate the artistry, the
Right.
emotional depths, and the impact he had on others,
Hmm.
but we also need to acknowledge the harm he caused
Right.
and the pain he inflicted.
So as we wrap up this deep dive
Yeah.
into the complex life and legacy of XXXTentacion,
Right.
what do you think is the most important takeaway for our listener?
I think the biggest takeaway is that life and art
Yeah.
are rarely simple or straightforward.
Right.
They're full of contradictions, complexities, and gray areas.
Yeah.
And XXXTentacion's story is just a powerful reminder of that.
Right.
It challenges us to think critically about the artists we support, the music we consume,
Yeah.
and the impact our choices have on the world around us.
It's a reminder that even the most challenging topics deserve our attention,
Yes.
our careful consideration,
Mhm.
and our willingness to engage in difficult conversation.
Totally.
Yeah.
And sometimes those conversations don't lead to easy answers,
Right.
but they can help us understand the world and ourselves a little bit better.
We hope this deep dive has given you a more comprehensive understanding of XXXTentacion's life,
Yeah.
his music,
Okay.
and the complicated legacy that he left behind.
We encourage you to continue exploring the source material, delve deeper into the story, and to form your own conclusions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of XXXTentacion.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.